All right. Hello. All right. Hey everyone. My name is Josh. If you don't know me, I run Moonlight and then Rabbit Cloud 2, which is why we're having tonight. And so we're doing what Moonlight is a place for people at 42 to gather and talk about what they're working on, whether there's a side project, a business, open source tool. My bad. Whatever it is, Moonlight's a great place to come and share it with all your peers. So normally we have open pitches. And then after that, we have normally a demo. So tonight's a little different. What we're doing is because Rabbit Cloud pitches are next week, we're going to be doing kind of an open mic night. So if you're planning on presenting next week, we're going to give you the chance to come up here. If you have slides, we can put them up. You can pitch what you're working on, pitch your product, or you can just talk about what you want to work on. And if you're looking for teammates, make sure to mention that. I know we have a few people looking for teammates too. But yeah, besides that, it's just a great night to get feedback for Rabbit Cloud next week. I'll be sending teams feedback as well afterwards. So we can go ahead and get started. Anyone have a project they want to talk about? Want to go first? No one wants to go first?
I mean, I'm willing to, but I don't want to.
Willing to?
Yeah, sure.
Sam? Phil? Okay, cool. So, and yeah, it's super informal too. So like, if you don't have slides or you don't really have a fully formed idea, talk about it, and others, we can give you our opinion on it, and maybe that'll help you solidify it. Cool. Awesome.
Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Phil. So I'm here to talk about a renderer project that I've been working on for a couple of months that I want to turn into a team project and bring to Rabbit Cloud. It's tentatively named Clive, which was originally a joke name but has now been backronymed into standing for Computed Light in Virtual Environments. So let's just jump into it. So it's what's called a path tracer, a Monte Carlo path tracer, and it's the coolest technology. I should back up and frame this a little bit better. This is not a business pitch. This would be a pitch for an open source project, possibly as a learning tool, and it could also conceivably be used to make some really cool promotional stuff for 42, but there's no real financial hook here. So Monte Carlo path tracing is the state-of-the-art technique for high-end rendering. It's used in advertising, in visual effects in movies, in full CGI movies. Disney, Pixar, all of them use this technology. It is very realistic, fancy, tricky, and intensive. It's super expensive, but what you get at the end is awesome. It's nowhere near real time. We're talking about images that take 20 to 100 CPU hours per frame in say a Pixar movie. Many of the renders that I'm gonna be showing off, I had to run for a day or two. What people might be more familiar with is ray tracing. Ray tracing is what most people think of for fancy high-end rendering, and this is sort of the next generation after that. It is not that different from path tracing. Is not that different from ray tracing. It's just you think about it in a different way. It's a different theoretical approach. It's more mathematically sound. You can do some really cool stuff with it. If it doesn't show, I made this presentation like in the last 10 minutes. It's not very structured, so bear with me. And it is deep and nuanced, and what I mean by that is there are a lot of different ways you can do every part of it. The unifying framework of how you do things is very fixed, but there's different ways of doing every step of it, and you can experiment with a lot of different ways. Sometimes a different approach is good for a different scene, or a different model, or to go faster, or to be more computationally friendly, or really, there's a lot of fiddling, and that's what I've been doing, working on this over the past couple of months, is the program that I built 3 months ago did the same things that the program does now. It's just I've tried X number of different ways of doing each step of it. And that's what I want. I want to improve the iteration time on that and iterate on more different parts of it, and that's one of the reasons that I want to bring a team aspect to it. So here's some motivating images. This is not a photo. This is some really nice path tracing. We've also got this guy. And the thing to notice here is the interplay of light off of different surfaces. Like this is going to be a reflection of, I can't actually tell, I think this building. The point is that all of the light is actually physically inhabiting the space. The light actually bounces around in a way that is physically realistic, and we end up simulating the entire light field of the space. This is from Coco, which if you haven't seen it, you should see it. It's great. And this is Pixar's most recent movie. It's fully path traced, and this scene shows off one of the particular advantages of this technique, which is that there is something like 1 million light sources in this scene. And traditional ray tracing and pretty much all traditional types of rendering are one of the restrictions on their speed is the number of light sources. It gets harder the more you add. Path tracing, number of light sources does matter, but it is in no way as much dependent on it. You can kind of add, in fact, when it's properly implemented and you're working at a large enough scale, one of the really sweet things about path tracing is that it's basically independent of all scene complexity. It's just resolution and how clear you want the image to be. You can make, the difference, I'm not saying that there's no difference. The difference between 1,000 polygons and 1 million, there is gonna be a difference, but the difference between 1 million and 10 million, not that much. Like it sort of asymptotically tops off, and you can kind of just make things more and more complicated as you go, which other graphics techniques don't have that issue, or don't have that advantage. So that's it for other people's stuff. So here's some of my stuff. Here's some materials. We've got, this is a glass ball in a mirrored cube. So there's actually, you can kind of see the seams. Here's the edge of the ceiling in the left wall. I don't know if it's showing up to the crowd, but it's actually just one box and one ball, and you get all these reflections. And here we have some glass balls showing off what are called caustics, a very familiar effect. Like if you have a glass of water and the sun is shining through the window and you get that really sharp, bright spot on the surface next to the glass. That's something that is trivial in path tracing and brutally difficult in any other graphics thing. And the reason is that we are actually literally simulating what the light literally does in the scene, as opposed to using all other graphics techniques use some degree of approximation in these various aspects. So those are some relatively simple scenes showing off some fancy materials. Here is a more complex scene with less fancy materials. This is from a model by Crytek called Sponza. It's based on a real place. So the model's not mine. I downloaded it. But the lighting is what we're talking about here. So these soft shadows here. It's important to note, it is textured to give it that sort of stony color. But for example, say this shadow here on the cusp of the lion's ear, that's not part of the model. It's from the lighting. And there's no, there's not a part, for example, in a traditional games engine, you might know what ambient occlusion is. It's a fancy effect that people like to talk about. It's an explicit calculation to make those kind of shadows and only those kind. This doesn't have that. This has one model for how light behaves, and just all of these nice natural effects emerge emergently, of their own accord. So that's one of the cool things about this. I could talk forever about the technology, so I'm gonna skip through. I have a bit more stuff about what path tracing is. I might come back to this if people are interested, but I want to talk more about just my goals for the project. But the gist here is the one important, well, let's come back to that slide. So my goals for the project are to improve the materials models. I showed off mirrors and glass and stone and diffuse surfaces like that, but there's a whole other world of metallic, iridescent, multi-layered. Things like car paint is actually multiple layers of materials. These are all things that are, there's papers and websites that show you how to do it. It's just a fair bit of work. So that's one area I want to improve in. Like I mentioned, I'm importing a lot of these models that we're rendering. Currently, it supports OBJ files and has tentative support for PLY files, but there's 6 or 8 standard model formats, and what I want is to be able to import any and all of them, combine them, manipulate scenes, set things up better. Because right now I'm kind of tied to, Sponza, the model that I showed off. We can just bring that in. It looks exactly like it looks. It's very difficult in the current code to do anything to it. It's rigid, and I want to be able to mess with stuff and have a bit more art direction. There's a lot more optimization to be done. If I go back, the glass caustics image, that took a day. The lion sculpture took a couple hours, so that's some optimization work done, but there's many, many miles to go. I definitely need to improve the UI. We need benchmarking stuff, settings. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of different approaches to every step here. So implementing a more modular approach where you could actually at the start say, I want to use this collision model, I want to use this material model, and that like upfront, so we can do, because one of my ideas for this is for it to become an education tool, something we could publish open source. Anyone who's interested in this field could not just see like, here's a way to do it, but here's the N different ways to do it, and you can play with them and combine them and see how they affect performance and realism and all these different kinds of things. There's also a bunch of fancier techniques that go on top of path tracing. They're all fundamentally the same idea, but 3 left, or I have 3 have elapsed? No, 3 left. Okay, cool. Things like bidirectional path tracing, metropolis light transport, lots of fancy terms. They're basically just cleverer ways of doing the same thing. They're algorithmically faster, and some of them have some neat properties of like helping with scenes that have very low light or scenes that have lots of reflection and things like that. And they're all, those are sort of reach goals, because they're, like I said, this kind of path tracing is the industry state of the art. The academic state of the art is that stuff that I was just alluding to, like metropolis light transport, but no one does that because it's really hard and complicated. I do want to kind of fool around with it, see if we could tackle it. I think it's within reach. And so there's a bunch of different directions we could go. If anyone here is in the graphics channel, I was talking about this today. The project is at kind of like a first plateau, like it does the thing. But we can push it in a lot of different directions. We could go towards real time or maybe even VR, but we could also push towards true photorealism with crazy materials. We could also turn this into a distributed computing project, using a bunch of different computers. I don't want to draw too much comparison to J-Gravity, but we could do something like that, basically, although we'd probably use OpenMP instead of writing our own distributed system, so that would be pretty easy, actually. We turn it into an animation thing, and there's also some really sweet stuff that NVIDIA has been publishing with neural networks and this kind of rendering, where, as I alluded to, the image gets clearer and clearer the longer you let it run. And you can use neural networks to basically shortcut that. You can show it 100 sample image and 100,000 sample image, and you show that enough times, then you just do 100 samples, show it to it, and you end up with the clarity that you would get spending all that extra time computing. So that's a pretty exciting sort of front end that we could work on. And that's the end of the presentation. So questions, thoughts? Oh, most definitely. That's a really good, sorry, getting a little ahead of myself. So like I alluded to, I've spent several months like deep diving on this. So I'm not necessarily, I do definitely want anyone who is interested in getting super deep on this, I definitely need I want at least one person who's willing to do that with me and push this further. But there's also a lot of work that can be done if you are, I don't know, intimidated by this or don't have the time to commit to going that deep on it or anything like that. Stuff like the file handling, scene manipulation, benchmarks, this is all work that's very important to the project, but that isn't like at the absolute sharpest point of intensity. And I definitely so there's a lot of different things that can be brought to the table in terms of a teammate. I'm looking for, ideally, I think this project would be 3 or 4 people. I want at least, like I said, one person to go to have a total understanding of the project, but then there's also room for more compartmentalized or individual components of it to be worked on. I guess I should talk about timetable. I guess Rabbit Cloud projects are usually like 2 or 3 months, right? So that would be the goal here. Although really, I want to focus on say like a 1 or 1.5 month timeline to really, because a significant portion of it is already done. At this point, a lot of it is polish and pushing the last mile. Yeah, I guess I think that covers pretty much everything I wanted to cover. Questions, anyone? Cool. Thank you.
If you're interested in participating in any of the projects, go find the people after the meeting or hit them up on Slack.
Oh, yeah, that actually
Yeah.
one other thing to say. That is my main reason for presenting right now. As you can see, this is kind of like, this project is pretty well in place, but I don't have any teammates, and I'm here to recruit specifically. So come talk to me. I hope it comes through that I'm super passionate about this field, so I can talk about it as much as you want, any part of it. Let's do it.
Awesome. Thanks. All right. Anyone else want to talk? Sam and then Opsa. Yeah. You good? Awesome. There's a Sam right there. What's up? Oh.
Okay. As you can see, I came incredibly well prepared. So my name's Sam. I apologize if I sound kind of stuffy. I've been really sick the past few days. So I'm going to be doing a fighting game for Rabbit Cloud. And the fighting game is going to be in the same vein as sort of Street Fighter, Tekken, Mortal Kombat, those type of games. I guess, okay. So I'll start with the fighting game and then get into more of reasoning behind it. But the central idea of the fighting game, it's called Battle Hat. And the core idea is that each character is tied to the hat that they wear. And they're fighting with the hat on their head. They just deal normal damage. They take the hat off their head. They can now power up with the hat and then put the hat back on their head and deal more damage. But that's not like the central idea of the game. I just want to explore different fighting mechanics. I guess explore player input and just the general, like, I don't know, feeling of that co-op competitiveness that you get from fighting games. Okay, so, okay. I came really well prepared. So what's the central reasoning behind making a fighting game? I've been playing fighting games since I can remember, since I was this small, going to the arcade and playing Tekken. And the global competitive esports market is valued at 500 million as of this moment, and it's valued to be 1.5 billion in 2020. So if you're interested in, I guess, dipping into that market, this would be a good way to go, but that's not my general purpose for trying to release a fighting game. I just have a incredible passion for creating games. Okay, so, oh God. Okay. All right. Yeah, it's gonna be a PC game. I want to develop for Switch. We can just move to Q&A because I'm totally like out of it right now. Elliot, what's up?
So, how about monetization? Are you going to make it one of those things where you can make little games you have for like
Definitely not. Like, I don't want to gouge the player. I want to release it for. Okay, so if you look at first party, like, or whatever, first party AAA developers for any platform, like Tekken released or sold 1.7 million copies last year for Bandai Namco. And then Capcom with Street Fighter sold like 1.5 million, which was under their sales projection, but they still made a profit. But for the independent games market, Skullgirls sold 50,000 within the first 10 days of release back in 2012, which I think is incredible for the year. Including that was an independent fighting game with beautiful hand-drawn graphics. And then Stick Fight, which released this year, which is like an arcadey sort of 2D competitive co-op game, that sold 1 million copies, which I think is pretty amazing for like $5. So if you look at all the independent games that are under $20, released on Steam or Switch or PlayStation 4, for example, they do have a market, and it's not, I wouldn't call it exploitable, but I would say that people who buy fighting games people who are into fighting games will buy most fighting games because they want to explore like different mechanics, they want to get competitive with it, and they want to, challenge their friends, have a good time. Like, I enjoy playing fighting games, and I want to, I guess, explore those mechanics, create the characters, really have fun with this. Any other questions? Yes.
Sorry if you said this already, but 3D, 2D,
2D, definitely. Yeah, I'm looking at pixel graphics. If you guys have played Street Fighter 3, it's got that nice pixel aesthetic. I mean, it might be a little dated. It still looks good. It still plays well. I definitely want to do all pixel graphics, and I think it'll have a nice indie aesthetic. Um, well, I can follow up to that. If so, I am looking for an artist. I'm looking. I imagine there's going to be a little bit of overlap for the teammates involved. Um, I'm looking for an artist, promotional, just general well-rounded developers, people to someone to build the system, general fighting system, and then people to add features to implement. If I don't get a dedicated full-time artist, then I will contribute to that personally, or if someone's better than me on the team, I'll have them contribute to them if they feel like doing that.
Do you have one of the older ones?
Yeah, and even if like we're waiting, even if you have an idea, but it's not fully formed, you don't have slides, like still talk about it. Like that's why we're here tonight. It doesn't need to be ready yet. Does anyone want to come back or come home for him? Anyone else want to talk about their project? Anyone else want to present? I'll do something. Okay, awesome. All right, I don't have a computer or anything like that, so I'm just going to keep this. All right. All right. So.
Hello, everybody. My name is Osa, and I came here a long time ago. Hello, everybody. My name is Opsa, and I've been here for about a year right now, and I just came by. I wanted to apply to the previous round of Rabbit Cloud, but since that opportunity passed me, I will be applying to this round. And I've already have my core members already on my team, which is Elliot Von Hume and Brendan Montoya. And Louis is going to be helping out a little bit, and Justin and Elliot Trigoning, like you saw earlier, will be helping me with the front end and business development on the side. But me, Brandon Montoya, and Elliot Von Hume are the core team members. The first thing that I wanted to do when I came here was I came from East Africa, and the funny thing is, despite what you might think for most of the developed world, there isn't a really good banking infrastructure that exists there. So a lot of these developing countries do have banking infrastructure like India and China and all these middle income countries, but for extremely underdeveloped countries, there is no banking infrastructure. And what comes to mind mostly is Zimbabwe. When they manage their currency, when they flood the market and basically make their currency worthless, and nobody can save in that currency. So I wanted to fix these challenges because I came from a country just like that, which is Ethiopia. And in the 5 years I was here, the Ethiopian birr, that was the currency that they nationally use, lost 36% in value, while the US dollar lost about 10% in value. So when you receive money, it's easier to receive it in US dollars. And a lot of times, even these people in these remote regions of the world save their savings in US dollars, like hide it underneath their pillowcase or their mattress or between their Bibles or their Qurans. So for the large part, they do save in US dollars because it's a more stable currency. I want to provide a better way to actually do this that doesn't include them having an actual bank account. You could suggest Venmo or Square Cash, but even that, to open one, you have to have a bank account to attach to it in order to receive funds, or you can receive funds in US dollars, but there you have to select which country. You got to do a lot of different things before you can actually receive these funds and be able to access them. For the markets that I'm suggesting, which are extremely underdeveloped, I was suggesting for ways to target these regions in the way that they normally receive their remittance payments from their relatives in North America and the US, which is something I used to send to my relatives, but between me sending the money and them receiving it, we lost about 20% in value. Up to 20% in value, depending on how low. And if it is higher, maybe about 7.5% between the currency exchange market and the people that exchange it into the local currency. Because when I went to the storefront here, I paid them a fee to give them access to the funds over there, where when they received the funds, they had to pay a fee as well. So you can guess how inefficient this market is. And I wanted to provide a distributed ledger that attaches themselves to their phone number. They can receive tokens for US dollars as their relatives send them. And whenever they want to send it to another person, they can send it to them in US dollars rather than exchange it into the local market. So that was my grand idea, and the best portion of this solution was to have not exactly blockchain, but it is very glitzy right now, and that's why I use this. But to have an immutable record of every transaction that happens between the people and their phone numbers. So make it a one-way transaction where somebody can only send, and if you want that money back, that the person you sent it to had to send it back to you. And there is certain places in the world that is experimenting with this, and that is Kenya, for the most part, which has M-Pesa, which you can set. They manage about 85% of the currency exchange market within Kenya. They haven't been able to penetrate very far into other countries because they were not the original developers of the marketplace. They actually did buy from another developer in that country, and the telecom company didn't decide to go that far with it. So what I'm suggesting could be applied to a lot of different countries. Just tokenize the US dollar as their sender or their relative send it from the US or from the UK or from a European state or or China or any Gulf state as well, which is a huge market for remittance payments. And when their relatives receive it, they're going to receive it in US dollars or Canadian dollars or euros or pounds or yuans. Only stable currencies that are openly traded on the open market rather than these closed economies where government mandates the currency exchange value, which is what rips off everybody because nobody exchanges at the government exchange rate. And yeah, so the very first part that I want to build in Rabbit Cloud is basically a front customer-facing app where they can download an Android app, and much like any other service, they sign up to be the beta testers of the service for now, and we can continue to build infrastructure around it with an Android app, actually, first and foremost, because outside of the US and Europe, nobody outside of the developing world has iPhones. They usually use Android devices. So again, I want to pursue a strategy that approaches this to meet the needs of these marketplaces. And yeah, thank you. That's it. Any questions? Go ahead. So how is this different from Telcoin? Well, you mean there are several startups, I gotta say. And thanks for giving me this point. The one thing that I wanted to target in the way that I was approaching this is there's market service providers in these regions that exchange this currency in their local currency. But because the people sending it are not aware of it and they don't have access to it in their local currency as soon as they need the cash in their local currency, there is service providers called Ka and Ria that provide this. But they give you a storefront ID for people in the US. I want them to have access to their traditional means of getting these currencies exchanged, but also have like the real dollar value on their phone to be able to exchange it into their local currency. I don't think anybody's targeting this market because they think it's so small. But again, it's not because they're so small now, but the fact that Africa is going from being 1/9 of the global population in 1990 to 4 out of every 11 human beings on Earth 4 out of every 10 human beings will be an African in the year 2100. So it's a market that will grow and that is still growing, and anybody that can be a kingmaker right now would probably hold a huge market share, but no other major company is pursuing this, and not even small startups. They are pursuing a strategy that focuses them into Southeast Asia or Central Asia. And again, these are middle-income countries that do have a banking infrastructure already to some degree. But for countries like Ethiopia, where 90-something% of the population doesn't have a bank account, it's kind of hard to actually exchange these values as easily and as readily as these other apps provide in their locality. Sending money to India through like a startup recently bought by PayPal, I forgot what the name of it. I'm losing the name, but they did it for $4.99 and then $3.99, and they did it pretty cheaply. But again, the other person on the other end received it in their bank accounts, and I wanted to give them the opportunity of getting the same kind of service through their normal local means. But when they received it, they see $100 received when their relatives send money. And when they reach a mechanic, they can send them $2 or $5 rather than sending them the local currency, which rips them off in a lot of ways. First and foremost, Brendan Montoya is gonna be helping build the back end, and to assist in that effort, it will be Elliot Van Hume. We're trying to build a Scala back end, and we were talking about this and the benefits and the cost of all this for a while, and we're trying to build a front-facing Android app to go on top of it. As far as a website that would go with it in the future, I will make a front-facing website because I've built many websites before, but I will figure out how to connect it to our backend first and foremost. But Brendan Montoya and Elliot Van Hume will help with the backend development. Go ahead. There is Western Union, and I never, when I sent my relatives money, even to Ethiopia, I never used Western Union because again, they only exist in the capital of Ethiopia. That's largely where it's available because that's where all the market and trade happens. But the people receiving it are hundreds of miles in either direction in rural sides of the country, and the people that need this service the most, and the people receiving these payments, remittance payments, are usually in rural localities across the country, not just in the capital. So if you're exchanging for business services and you're sending it to a banker in the middle of Ethiopia, sure, you might use Western Union or some other service provider like MoneyGram itself, but it's not, it's you can't get it to your relatives or somebody that you know or somebody that needs the service in, say, like the city I was born in. Because everybody has a mobile phone, surprisingly. Like, the funny thing is that's what the scale of technology gives us, is the fact that everybody has an access to a mobile device. When they receive this payments, they can access their. I want them to be able to text their PIN code to our platform, and we'll send them back their balances that they have inside of their account, either in euros or US dollars or whatever set of currencies that they receive from their relatives. And if they want to exchange it into their local currency, I'll give them the option of using Western Union, which they do have an API, or MoneyGram, or what was it called again? I talked to some people from Kai Express that I used to use to send money, which they give an amazing exchange rate for these areas. So yeah, even the storefronts in that location, if they want to use them as their exchanger, I can definitely do that. But primarily, I want them to keep the money on the platform and to be able to send it to each other without having to reach a third-party service. Because again, as soon as they leave the platform, I want to charge a fee and disincentivize, not to disincentivize, but there has to be a way for us to make money and to incentivize them to keep the money on the platform and to send it to each other on the platform. But if they do have a US bank account, when they exchange the currency out, say $100 US, they'll receive $100 US inside of a US bank account, because Visa and MasterCard has APIs for you to exchange these amounts out as a credit to their account. So being a guarantor versus a guarantor of these funds is a better way that I'm going to put it, of these funds, is what I intend to do. Go ahead.
So if I follow what you just said, your goal is for a lot of this money to sort of stay within the ecosystem,
Yeah.
and individuals be swapping them rather than making the digital to physical currency transition.
Yeah.
So then,
To avoid like the exchange rates between these currencies that are normally extremely high, and to avoid having them to dealing with this.
okay, so then you mentioned blockchain earlier, but kind of hand-waved about it. Is this, are we talking about like?
I want to create an immutable record that is within the. Again, I want to be a guarantor of these tokens for dollars. Okay. Or
Be pegged to dollars.
pegged to dollars for every token for US dollars, it will be pegged to dollars. And I want to be the guarantor of these tokens rather than telling everybody I own this, because then you do run to forex laws that don't let you send more than a certain amount ever so evenly anywhere in the world. If you send more than 6 transactions out in a period of 6 months from your bank account worth a certain dollar amount, you could be investigated by the FBI. And there are laws that you do run into, and I want everybody to avoid it by tokenizing it, because everybody's sending money with Bitcoins in every one of these open ledger accounts, and nobody seems to bat an eye to which country that they're sending it to. So I want to take advantage of this legal loophole or legal venue that has been created right now.
So when you do that, one of the issues can be volatility, right?
Yeah.
Of the currency.
Again, I'm only pegging it in the major currencies that this is held in, rather than their local currency. If they want to exchange it into their local currency, there are service providers that I will write them a check that same day to go into their bank account, and they give their customers accordingly. So I'm not touching the local currency of their states. Only their service providers will. I'm only going to be the guarantor of the US tokens and the British pound or the euros or the yuans or the Saudi riyal or something. A free floating currency rather than something like that. Questions? That's it?
All right. Anyone else have anything they want to present or talk about? Are we good? Do you want to talk about Wilderness Patrol, or do you want to talk? You have something you want to talk about? Last chance. Next week. Are you going to present it? Do you need teammates? All right. All right. Are we good? All right. Before I wrap up, did you want to present? All right. Before I wrap up, if anyone wants to get more feedback on their projects, just come find me or message me on Slack before next Tuesday. If you need a team, is there anyone here that's looking for a team? Anyone? All right. If you're shy, don't want to contact people, just go. If you're interested, just go find the people that presented. And for the people that did present, I'll have feedback by the end of tonight. So, awesome. Thank you for coming. Let me know if you have any questions.